themselves and what they do. We can probably start with Mark.
All right.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mark Yampolsky. I'm a games designer focused on systems design. Up until fairly recently, I was at Respawn working on Apex Legends, primarily in game modes.
I'll go next. Hi, I'm Jason. I'm a associate designer at Second Dinner, mostly focused on content design. Before this, I was a graduate from the UCSC Games program.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Joe Magdalena. Go by Joe Mag. I'm a game designer too at Riot Games, working on gameplay and systems for Teamfight Tactics. Before then, I was at Niantic for a few years working in R&D, and then before then, Blizzard working on Hearthstone and World of Warcraft.
Hello, I'm Monica. I am currently associate designer at Shell Game. I am primarily focused on system gameplay, and I work a lot of in VR, mobile, and PC space. I have a lot of experience working with large existing franchise and creating gameplay to help satisfy the fantasy of the franchise that with its stories and stuff.
Okay, awesome. I'm really glad all of you guys were able to make it. To start off as like a little two-parter to that first question, how did each of you get into game design, and where your path is or where your job is currently today? And I think we can probably start with maybe Joe this time.
Sure. I came out of QA at Blizzard. I first started applying to Blizzard working as the QA night shift. I was testing World of Warcraft from 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. back in the early 2000s, and worked my way up through leadership through there. And for a long time, I actually wanted to be a producer until I realized I wasn't good at it. And actually kind of took a step back and really got this I really wanted to get into production because I wanted to be in the room when decisions are being made and have that influence on the game. So I actually self-taught. I went and learned Unity. I went and learned C# and programming and everything, and started making my own games. Started making game jams, short little form stuff. And then started. There was a role on the team open up. We need someone who can make a bunch of stuff really quickly. I'm that's my whole portfolio. And I started working on Hearthstone, doing tavern brawls, and kind of coming up with ways to remix the content. And that was sort of how I really got into both game design as a hobbyist and then as a professional.
That's awesome. I'll go ahead and jump in here. I had a tangential story to most. I graduated with game design. I did a senior project, which really helped my portfolio. Our entire senior year, we worked on a game, and I was a producer and a designer for this game. But after college, I actually ended up doing esports social media for a while. I got onto a professional Dota 2 team and did social media for them as sort of a passion project, sort of a I really like esports. I had this opportunity, so I went and took it. And afterwards, I took a step back. I left after the big tournament because I felt hey, this is time for me to reflect, take some time, see what I want to do next. And I decided, hey, I want to work in games for a little bit. And so one of the important things for me was being able to translate those experiences, translate all the things that I did there to skills that could work in game design as well.
Yeah, I have a combination of both in the way that I did have a degree in game design, so for me, for a long time, I always know how to be a game designer. However, I started as a QA. I actually work in a few different jobs. This is my third year in the game industry. I've worked in QA, I've worked in localization, I've worked in production, I've worked in community management, and to me, those experiences help me understand how the studio runs, understand how different part of the studio works together, which helps me to land a job as a game designer and be able to work my dream job.
For me, I feel like mine was pretty straightforward. I went to school for computer science with an emphasis in game design at USC. Gravitated a lot more to the projects-based classes where I could actually make video games, and started leaning pretty heavily into design at that point. Graduated from college, got an offer to work on Apex the day of my graduation, which was stressful, but and yeah, I worked on Apex for 3 years over probably a dozen seasons. And I got to learn how to work with an awesome design team and be a vision holder and work on a AAA team in that setting. Live service is what I mean.
Got it. I love how like everyone has a very very different paths, but it's really interesting to see everyone get to game design. And I guess for our next question it's mainly about the skills of a designer. And so being able to look and play a game or look at a game and immediately being able to break down the player experience is a pretty essential skill. But I think a lot of people are wondering, how do you build this skill and what is the most effective way in building that particular skill? We can probably start with Jason this time.
Sure. I think there's sort of two different factors to this that blend together really well. I think the primary factor is your own experience, being able to communicate your own experience and show that you understand what makes an experience that experience. So one example that I like to give is a roller coaster. So during a roller coaster, you're feeling all this adrenaline, you're feeling these emotions and like excitement flowing through you as you're going through this like high speed woo 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 woo. But I think the important part as a designer is being able to take a step back and understand what's causing these emotions, what's causing this experience. All the G forces that you're feeling, you're seeing the set around you, you're hearing everyone else screaming and yelling around this roller coaster. And I think being able to combine that breakdown while also not losing the experience, because if you're taking all this time to think and losing the base experience, then that defeats the point. Being able to understand while experiencing is really important. And the second part is listening to other people's perspectives, because other people can experience things much different than you.
I want to jump off a little bit because yeah, I think it's a lot about like identifying feelings, identifying emotions, and like really look at what you want to get out of an experience when you're playing games. Think about feedback about them. What is frustrating? What is confusing? Why is it confusing? Like, start. What do you like? What is enjoyable? You know, you talked about in the roller coaster sort of thing like that. Okay, I really like the hills. Okay, why do you like the hills? Like, because it gives me this feeling. Okay, what is that feeling like? Like, it's really all about these dissecting your own emotions and feelings. And I mean, kind of like a part of the design is like regurgitating them, putting them back together, and being like, I want to make sure that I get that feeling. I want to make sure that I'm doing this and not doing that.
I also like I highly agree with what you guys say. Although for me, there's a different approach I have is when things goes wrong, ask why they goes wrong. So like not only play good games, knowing why they're good, but also when you play bad games, understand why they're bad. Why does this thing feel janky? Why are you feel frustrated? Like understand why, what are the mistakes, what are the common mistakes other people are make, can help you from like prevent you from making the same mistake. And another thing I learned a lot of as a community manager is you will get a lot of player complain about like, oh, I don't like this, I don't like that. And it's always interesting to like see what they don't like and try to figure out what they actually don't like. Because players sometimes will be like, oh, the system is broken. Then you realize the system is not broken, but the description, the way you describe the system is misleading. So like, it's always interesting to like look at the review of a game
and why it's causing players to feel a certain way. But like, I think for me personally, I think of games fundamentally as stories, whether that's the scripted cutscene driven narrative that you would experience in a regular game, but also the emergent narrative that a player experiences over the course of a match or a gameplay session or a week or month-long stint in some games that have that level of engagement. Because fundamentally you want the story of the emotions that the players are experiencing. We've all talked about emotions as the core of game design, understanding of those breakdown mechanically, but I think it's also the evolution of those emotions and what's specifically triggering those emotions to occur. And as a game designer, really trying to control that experience, creating the emotions that you want as much as possible.
Hey, awesome. I really love everyone's answers on that, because I think definitely it really comes down to like experience, emotion, and then also trying to figure out what works in the experience and then what doesn't. So for our next question, so this is kind of more of a about portfolios a little bit, along with you know, the aspect of game design. So say that there is a entry level design position, whether that be like level or technical area, etc. What are the core skills that you want to see in a junior game designer portfolio or for an entry level position? And if you have any examples of like artists or game designers to look at for their portfolios, that'd also be great to share if you would like. And then I guess this time we can start off with Monica.
Yeah, I think a lot of, so there's two different, there's two different type of hiring for junior position. There are project hire, where they're hiring for a specific project, in which case they're looking for whether you understand the genre of the game, whether you understand what's the mechanic, the audience. And that is very niche. If you don't get hired, like it's like there's jobs I will never get because it has like a very particular audience that I'm not part of it. And it's like, it's going to take a lot of effort for me to understand. But there's also like general hire where they hire a game designer, in which case they're looking for whether you understand what a game design do. For a junior job, they're not really looking for you to come in with like, you know, a lot of skills or like knows how to do everything, but like whether you understand. So there's this huge misconception I have seen is game designers are the ideal person. And that's like, sometimes to me it's a red flag, because unfortunately, like I think a lot of game design job is creative problem solving rather than being like the ideal person. And whether you're able to adjust your idea, your creative solutions based on the need and the, like updated requirement is something people are looking for, rather than like, oh, you have this brilliant idea for this game that may make billions of dollars. So like I think those are very different. Currently I don't have like a lot of like a portfolio reference on my mind. However, there is a Medium article by Marina. She wrote about like what does like game design portfolio need. So like I can share it later, like if you need, if like people are interested.
No, yeah, awesome. If yeah, if you can share that to the Discord after the panel, that'd be great. Yeah.
I think I was talking to somebody who asked this advice on Twitter the other day, and really the biggest thing that I look for when I'm going through somebody's portfolio is this understanding of the game design process and iteration. I don't feel like I focused on that enough in school, so it's a very different experience, like working in a studio or indie environment. But like fundamentally, out of the box, most ideas are bad, right? Like, but the thing that makes game mechanics and dynamics good is fundamentally they take these ideas that might have a nugget of something, and it's through iteration and testing and feedback in that constant loop as much and as often you can do it until you finally have to lock, is the thing that makes game design great. So when I'm looking at somebody's portfolio, like I don't just want to see a list of responsibilities that you had on a project. I'm really looking for, what was your process for these decisions that you've made? What was your methodology for getting from A to B to C, and focusing on that. I mean, also like at this point, there aren't, paper designers don't exist anymore. That's like a thing of the past. Virtually everybody in design is expected to be technical in some capacity. On Apex, every single designer was either a scripter or a level designer. There's, I think, a lot of value in being able to integrate yourself into a team and say, hey, as somebody who creates content, I can have an idea, pitch it to a team, prototype it, and bring it to production by myself if I needed to, with the exception of, I'm obviously not going to do effects by myself, but on an indie team where you wear a lot of hats, that's also insanely valuable.
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo a lot of what Mark said. From what I look for is I look for process. I look for like your thought process. I look for like I really love where I can see it's like a level evolving or a gameplay mechanic evolving, and where you can see like I thought this. I want to see like what were your assumptions? How were they challenged? What did you do to adapt to them? I really thought it'd be cool to do this, but when people play tested it, they actually really liked that, and so I developed against made these changes to the system, and like that really shows, because I mean that's sort of the professional aspect of it. Like I need to know that you're able to take in feedback and understand that if I'm going to work with you, professionally. I mean, it's also one of the things where I also like talking about, game jams a lot too, because it puts a level of restraint on you that is actually very similar to professional restraints. Of you have to have it done this week, and in whatever state it's in, and whatever things you need to cut or remove or change to be done by that point. Which again, is what we have to do all the time when we're meeting milestones and deadlines and everything. Not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, that sort of thing.
Everyone else had fantastic answers. I don't have too much to add, but I do just want to echo, as game designers, we don't get the right answer, we find the right answer. And it's important for us to understand that you understand that process of working towards finding the right answer.
Okay, awesome. These were all like really good answers. And just to kind of like go back a little bit from when we were talking about like what to look for in games to study. So from Twitch, someone asked, how do I, specifically about playing good games and then bad games, how do I distinguish between a bad game and a game that is not not for me, or in that sense, if that makes sense? And I guess now we can start off with Mark.
I think a lot of it is like, as a designer, having empathy and understanding different perspectives on that gameplay experience. And the more perspectives you expose yourself to, you can look at this game and say, hey, maybe this isn't for me, but I could see how it could be for someone else. And you could even go looking for information like that. It's all over Twitter, Google, wherever. What makes a game good is hyper subjective. So I think it's more about what makes a game good for you. Because as a designer, I don't think you're trying to make the best game that appeals to everybody all the time. There are some teams with that goal, but it's a really hard goal to hit. But it's more like, as a designer, what things do I like in a game? What systems do I find myself attracted to? What ideas do I find interesting? And finding the passion in those. And if you can take those and apply them to whatever you're working on, that's what's awesome. That's what makes the job exciting. That's what helps create cool, new, innovative stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely should be challenging your assumptions about games that you're looking into. Should be going into genres that you might not be, for you, or what you really enjoy. But I mean, I think it's worth playing some of that stuff just to even have that dialogues. You can talk about like, okay, I didn't like, I could see what they were going for in this thing, but I didn't like how this played, or I didn't, that doesn't really excite me as a player in these ways. I mean, but there's also like, I feel like, yes, there is subjective, but they're also like, there's a couple of games top of my, I played Aliens Colonial Marines when it first came out, which was a broken mess. Apologies if anyone is seeing this that worked on it. I know these things are tough and crazy, but there's interesting to see like what falls apart in some games, including ones that have either released before they were really ready, or had fundamental problems with them. And yeah, start to see like, okay, what were the corners that were, what were the not necessarily the corners, but what were the shortcuts that were made, or what were the, the compromises that were made, and how did those actually affect the experience, And it's a lot about identifying those points of frustration. And it's a lot about identifying, oh, I don't like that it seems like it takes a very long time to get through this level. It seems like the AI is not fair, and I'm not having fun because I keep getting killed over and over in this room that doesn't feel like it was, well put together. So it's like about identifying those emotions, for something for you to remember when you're doing something similar. Like I will not build a room that works like this way because I didn't like it where it was that, or I don't want to end up in that same situation.
I have a bit of an example I wanted to go into. I've been playing Metroid Dread. I have not played any of the older Metroid games, so this is my first Metroid game. And I realized this is a really great game, but I'm getting lost a lot. And so I had to take a step back and ask the question, is it me or is it the game? Is it me or the game? So I took a look at some of the other Metroidvanias played, like Hollow Knight, Dead Cells, and I took a look and said, why am I not getting lost in these games as much as I am in Metroid Dread? And I realized Dread has a lot of these small corridors that are really important. These passageways and tiny little areas that aren't as visually different from the rest of the game that turn out to be really important in your navigation of the map. And so I realized there's a really intricate map in this game. This game has a really cool map, so many passageways that feels really awesome to discover as a player, but it also creates a bit of this confusion at first glance. So I'm realizing that as a hardcore Metroid fan, this is a really great selling point of the game. You're having this Metroid experience of discovering your path as you go. But as a first timer, I'm having a slightly different experience of what's going on. Where am I going?
Yeah, one thing Jesse Shaw has said, which I find really helpful, is identify the player fantasy they're trying to achieve in the game, and then find out whether the design actually matches with the player fantasy. So like if the player fantasy, like if the game is trying to sell you that you are very powerful, but the design is disempower you, then there's a disconnect that could be problematic. And so it's a good way to see like whether the design match with the goal they're trying to achieve. But on the other hand, like I totally understand there are games like the player fantasy is just not mine. However, I want to suggest that we are very lucky now right now because you can just go on internet and like using Twitch or YouTube, find players who enjoy that player fantasy and watch them play, and like to embody the player fantasy. If you couldn't like understand just from playing it, you can watch other people playing it and see how their experience tell about the game design. So use whatever resource you have. There's many different resources to understand player these days.
Awesome. I keep saying this, but I really like everyone's answers. They're so in depth and it's really informative. And I also did hear that about Metroid Dread in particular, because I've seen some of my friends play it and they're like, I keep getting lost everywhere. But it's kind of interesting to see that in comparison to like a person who's a big fan of it versus like someone who's very new, and kind of like how that kind of correlates together. So with that in mind, we're kind of jumping into also a little bit more about kind of like new designers. So what are new designers often unprepared for when they're trying to get into the industry, whether that be lining up their first indie contract or landing like a studio position, whether that be AAA or whatnot. And I think we also have a pretty diverse group of designers here, so I'm really interested in hearing about. And I guess now we can start. Joe?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think from something Mark said earlier, there's not really a lot of like paper designers out there anymore, and I think that is something I see a lot in people who are kind of struggling to see like either get into design or understand what is necessary for them. I've seen people like have like binders full of like designs of like concepts of like cards or that sort of thing, and been like, okay, but like what have you implemented? Like what have you actually like gone through these steps to like get this like actually like plugged into the game and everything? And that's where you start to like. That's what I find to be generally one of the biggest disconnects. I mean, there's certain aspects that you will always start with, understanding it in paper, but you do have to kind of take that leap into learning a tool of how you need to implement it. And that doesn't matter if that's GameMaker, Unity, Unreal, like there's Twine, like, but you need to be out there and take a concept into a functional creation, because that's just such a requirement in the vast majority of design roles.
I just want to jump off that point and say I was in a bit of a boat when I graduated. I was under the impression that paper designers were still a thing, and so I didn't have as much technical experience. So one thing that was important for me was to take a step back, go into some of these tutorials and learn what's going on, learn about the systems, learn about the tech. And then from there, what I would do is also translate some of these other experiences on my application to show that I'm ready to learn. I can learn really quickly, and I can absorb all this knowledge to show that I can shore up all this experience about the technical aspect that I don't quite have as much of.
That's super key about showing that you can learn the tooling, because that's the thing, like, you will, it's not even just a matter of like learning Unity to work in Unity. It's a matter of showing that you can learn a tool, because almost every job I have jumped to has had its own set of bespoke tooling or implementation tools, and that you need to pick up. And they maybe have good or bad tutorialization around that, but very much a like learning to make something in TFT is similar to making something in Hearthstone, but was totally different from the way it was making something in Niantic. And yeah, there's all these, but having that skill of being able to say, like, I can pick up a tool quickly is like what makes me marketable as talent.
I was muted. I'd definitely be prepared to collaborate a lot more than you'd expect. I think on Apex we had this idea that the designers were vision holders for their feature, so we'd be responsible for that feature from idea to ship, and even supporting it beyond that. And a big part of that is knowing how to distill your idea and pitch your idea to other teams. Like that was a big part of getting a project from, or a feature from prototype to greenlit, is we would go and we'd give this presentation to audio, VFX, all the different versions of 3D art that you would have on a AAA team, and get their buy-in and get an understanding of what they were excited about in terms of the player fantasy of that feature. There's a lot of that.
Yeah, I want to like add on that. As from my experience working with a lot of students, I think one thing a lot of students are not prepared is how important communication is as a game designer. And that is like communication is, I think, 50% of your job. And not only it goes two part to me. There's one part very important, like I think you guys already touched on, is how to communicate the technical level, being able to talk to a programmer and express what do you need, and talk to an artist and like discuss with them what's the best solution to like create the effect you want. And being able to understand how each discipline work and being able to communicate with them to create a harmony working pipeline is very important. On the other hand, I think a good designer need to have empathy of your teammates, because game development essentially is a bunch of people in the group on the same boat, and you're stuck together making this thing. So if the boat sink, you're all gonna sink. So it's a lot about like understand when like your teammate is burned out, understand they're stressed, and like listen to them when a programmer telling you this is impossible or this is way too much work for it to work, and understand how to discuss with them to be able to work in a harmony with your teammate is something that is extremely important. But I don't think, unfortunately, I don't think a lot of game school are teaching those, which is like something I like. If you want to be a good game designer, these are like very important skill to have.
And one more thought that I had that popped in my head. Just wanted to echo Joe's thoughts on implementation. This is dependent studio to studio, but on Apex as an example, we never really wrote game design documents. When you're putting together an idea for a pitch, it had to be less than 1 page. And then the actual pitch presentation to content departments had to be less than 5 minutes. So it was really good at taking an idea and understanding what's important about it and really distilling it into its essence, because fundamentally, the faster you can get through that process, the faster you can get to implementation. And like we mentioned before, implementation is when an idea starts to go from a nugget to being an actual thing, because implementation is iteration. There's only so much you can sit around in a document and noodle in it before you have to go make a thing and figure out whether it works or not. And once you do that, the design could change completely.
Yeah, and that's different from project to project. I've been involved in projects that were very documentation driven, and everything really kind of existed in like the confluence and had to have X, Y, and Z. And then also on projects where it's like, yeah, just don't even worry about like writing it up, just throw it into the game, or come up with a way to like do it in like, if you can't sell it in like 3 bullet points, don't work, it's not worth it, So it's team and project dependent.
Yeah, and another thing I think is very important for game designer. Unfortunately, school doesn't have a lot of experience. Is playtesting. Like playtesting is extremely important. Like as like Mark and Joe has said, like your game idea will be very different based on playtesting result, because eventually you are creating an experience for your player. You're not just creating an experience for your own like fantasy. So playtesting is very important, and understand how to playtest, how to observe your playtest, how to answer the right question, and how not to like things to avoid to like guiding your playtester, and like creating like how to create accurate results through playtesting is something that is like very important for my job as a game designer.
Playtesting is arguably the most important step in game design, period, I would say.
I think it's also important. Go ahead.
I was just gonna give you all my like pro tip on playtesting, because something I learned from Ben Brode a while ago is prompt your players to say something they like about it. Players are very quickly to tell you things they don't like, by actually even including in whatever communication you're putting out there. What did you love? What did you actually like really gravitate towards? And I've found like, yeah, obviously I find a lot of problems to fix, but almost finding stuff that people love gives me something to really latch onto, and like, okay, what can I do to improve that? What can I do to like expand on that? I can fix these problems here, but what can I do to really like, this was the fantasy, this is what people like gravitated towards. So
I wanted to offer a bit of the opposite side of be prepared to take negative feedback.
Ooh, yeah.
Once a game launches, which is where we're at a little bit, once a game launches, you're going to get a flood of the positive, but also a flood of the, we don't like this. You really need to change this. We don't like this. You need to change this right now. And so I think it's important to be able to distill that down to, why do they not like it? What part of the system do they really not like? Do we need to change it? And one perspective that I heard that is really helpful to me to sort of process this all is, as players, you have one outlet to communicate it, and in the internet, everything gets echo chambered up to a yell. The internet doesn't speak in anything less than a yell. And so I think it's important to, when you're hearing this negative feedback, take a step back and try to distill it down. Keep the emotions out of it, take the feedback from it.
Yeah, find the common thread was the way I always looked at it. Especially like when I worked on Hearthstone and would look at Reddit, which had some negative thoughts about the game. It was all kind of like, okay, I see people, they're yelling and they're saying this sort of thing, but like, really, they're saying this card is too powerful. They're saying this like doesn't feel fair, and like kind of, yeah, taking that step back to understand it in aggregate.
Okay, awesome. I love everyone's responses. That was like exceptionally really good, and I really liked hearing everyone's different perspectives on that. We did get a question in the Twitch chat about specifically for beginners who are starting out in game design, so very similar to what we were just talking about. So do you have any advice for beginners who just started their career in game design, not really great in programming yet? It is kind of overwhelming to see lots of information out there. Are there any beginning resources that you recommend?
I just started. I think the most important resource for me was the feedback that I got from interviews. I got a lot of feedback of, we really like X and X, and it was just experience. And I was like, that sucks. I'm gonna take the one route I know to get experience. For preface, that really sucks. This is not really like the best way, but I think that this is how I processed it and how I took it to a more productive level. I went and got a certification in Scrum Mastery. I went through all the Unity tutorials, and I'm like, hey, I did all this stuff. I did all these classes. I now have this level of technical experience to go with my quote unquote paper experience. Please let me know if this works. And after that, once I got my first job, I started learning from everyone. I asked all the questions that I was having about things, and people were really helpful in answering all those questions for me.
In terms of resources, I can give you my quick little rundown on what I recommend to literally everyone. GameDev.tv do these incredible tutorial series for Unity, Unreal, everything, and that's really like how I learned. They're like 20 hours long. They're super in depth. They treat it mostly more like a class. It's like $10 per class. I think there's a Humble Bundle right now for a bunch of them, and it's absolutely worth it. I find them much more rewarding because it takes you through a project in a very long form way rather than just like here's a YouTube tutorial of how to do something. I've always found those a little too small in scope. Yeah, highly recommend those. I always recommend Art of Game Design by Jesse Schell to everyone. That's my Bible. I recommend Theory of Fun by Raf Koster. And another thing I recommend a lot new designers is a book called Steal Like an Artist. And it's like this thin, but it's like all about like owning your influences and realizing that like how we talk about like playing other games and recognizing what you like about them and don't like about them. Like that's kind of the best way to approach games, is really being like, I really like that system. I really want to see how I can integrate that. I really like how this played over here. And it's not like you're not like copying it bar none, but you're really looking for these influences in these systemic ways of like, I really want to see how this is built and try and rebuild it. But yeah, and game jams, again, I'm going to come back to them a million times because I find them so valuable. But like that, going from like Game Dev TV into tutorials into game jams, and like was able to build a tutorial like outside of a traditional like school system, really worked out well for me.
Yeah, I want to highlight one resource a lot of people ignore that I find extremely useful is engine documentation. Like if you use Unreal has really good documentation and like bits and stuff, and like Unity has really good documentation. And sometimes I find like that's a good resource to just read up like what the engine documentation. And one of the way I use to help increase my technical skill is have a project and find out what is you want to do. Like recently I've been playing around with like combat design and emotion blueprints, and like I have a clear goal. I want to create a fighting scene of a grandma, and then I Google and I will like target to be like, what are the resources that can help you answer the question I have? And those are like good ways for me. Like it's a good way. But like if you just started, like as Joe said, GameDev.tv, a lot of resource, like follow along is a good way. But once you follow along a couple tutorial, it may worth just like start your own project and like try to just get something done. And it doesn't have to be good, but like the process of getting things done is a very valuable resource of portable portfolio to know like how to figure answer on yourself and solve problem. But on the other hand, it's really fun.
Also, never feel bad about Googling things, because even professional game developers, years and years of experience, I don't think I've ever gotten a collider in Unity right the first time I've tried to program it. So, no, we all are doing it, but part of the process is learning about like what type of terminology you want to look for, what sort of things you need. I'm looking to build a fighting engine, or this is a movement I want to do. Who's done this? And like, then copy pasting some code out of Unity answer.
And don't be afraid to ask for help either. Even, when you do get hired, I know there can be pressure to like try and prove that you know everything. But it's so much easier when you just go and ask for help from people who've been working in the thing that you're dealing with. I've never had a coworker who like didn't want to help out and contribute and collaborate in that way. I mean, everybody should find the best way to learn from themselves. I know personally for me, I'm a huge proponent of learning by doing. I find it super hard to retain information if I'm just following a list of steps. For me, I think I built my most valuable skills and had a lot of good examples for my portfolio because I would take an idea that I was passionate about and try to make it real. And I think a big part of that that's really important to me personally is that you're giving yourself room to make mistakes because you're learning while doing. I think all too often when we're learning about things, we don't give ourselves space to be wrong and then learn from that. And that's really what I think in my mind solidifies the most valuable lessons I've had as a game designer.
I want to add one more thought to this, that a really valuable resource that you can have is, if you're not already in the studio, if you're still looking to get in, a really valuable resource is reaching out to people who are in studios. One of the best information sources for me when I was looking for a job was I reached out to a connection that I had, and even though he wasn't in my field, or rather my discipline, he helped connect me to people within his studio in my discipline, and they gave me invaluable resources, invaluable feedback. And I think it's just important to be respectful and come prepared to these conversations.
That's a great way to.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's also a great way to network and build valuable industry connections. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants you to just hit them up for like, oh, hey, do you have a job for me? It's a lot easier to ask that of somebody if you have a pre-existing relationship and you've had genuine conversations with them about what makes game design interesting to you, if you've learned from them or anything like that. And that's something you should keep doing even professionally too, you know?
Yeah, we're all happy to talk about it. We clearly think about this stuff all the time. But yeah, like, don't cold call me on LinkedIn, please. Approach me anyway. Like, hit me up on Twitter. Happy to chat about sort of stuff. But that's something that's like, yeah, but don't do that.
Okay, awesome. I can attest to the Unreal Engine documentation. I use that all the time, and I also Google so much. But yeah, awesome advice, guys. And then, so one of our second to last question, because we are starting to run out of time a little bit, but we're going to go a little bit longer since the panel was a bit delayed. So from the Twitch chat, what are your opinions about students working on smaller, more constrained games versus longer year-long projects?
I think it's extremely lucky. Honestly, like right now, I have like my job where we work on like 2-3 years project, but like I have my personal project because one thing I wasn't aware about being a game designer is how many I have to get approved. Like a lot of meeting, I have to talk to different people to get approved about this. When you work on a year-long project, involve like a lot of money, a lot of people, everything needs
different things. The key takeaway is what you learned during that process. I mean, nobody's gonna look at a 2-month long short project and expect it to have like AAA multi-year quality in it. Like I think everyone contextualizes the kind of projects when we look at them. And like even in a professional capacity, there's some features I worked on Apex that took less than 2 months and were like loot table adjustments, and there are some that took over a year of prototyping just to get off the ground. Yeah, the key thing there is just a learning experience and being able to demonstrate that.
I think a big thing you should be able to demonstrate if you've got a portfolio that's got, I mean, your portfolio probably should have a blend of that. Probably should have some longer form projects and some of the short form projects. But you need to really demonstrate that, like, through those, that you were scoping correctly. That, like, yes, this took a year because I wanted to do X, Y, and Z, because this required this amount of time, this amount of resources, and this short project I was able to kind of do on my own because I didn't need X, Y, and Z, and was able to either complete or get it to whatever state. It's all about communicating process and everything. But yeah, certainly I think we're all kind of in agreement. There's not really like one is not necessarily better than the other. They both have their strengths and weaknesses, but it's all about communicating your process, why they took what they took.
It's crazy that it took us this long to mention scope, because scope is one of the most valuable lessons you'll learn as a game designer. Every single student I know overscopes. I overscoped this student. I still overscope.
Always.
It's just like knowing how to manage that is crucial. I think really when studios say we're expecting designers to be their own producers or something along that vein, really what they're saying is know how to manage scope, know how to be optimistic about what you can achieve, but know what you can pare back, and know the time that you need to make that decision is all really important. Don't be afraid to kill your babies.
Yeah, your darlings.
Yes.
But yes, yeah, scope. That's also one of the big reasons I'm gonna harp on game jams again. But they do teach you scope like nothing else. Of like, what can you get done in a weekend? Realistically, what can you actually get done in a weekend? And doing that over the course of a couple times, you'll probably screw it up the first couple of times. You will probably horribly overscope or try and shoot for the moon. But you know what? You might come up with some cool ideas. You might be a little, I think it's good to learn about what you're capable of for scope. But I also, it's something that like junior designers also can make some of the most incredible things because they don't know what they can't do yet. So don't be afraid to go big, but through your process as becoming a professional, or even as a student, it was like really learning about what you can do in what amount of time.
Yeah, I do want to acknowledge the fact that I understand for students, it's really hard to have to get involved in a year-long project, and like because it required time and resource that most students and like beginners do not have, and that's okay. Like for me personally, I started doing like very small project, then get bigger, eventually lead me to getting hired for a 6 months project that lead me to getting hired for like a year-long project. So it's a progress. Take your time, and like different project has different like challenge and different kind of fun, and like but like any kind of project, like I always show like game jam is you don't make polished game in game jam, but does not mean it cannot showcase your ability as a game designer.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I was kind of surprised that we haven't mentioned scope since the start, but yeah, I can definitely attest to scope being kind of important. I guess in terms of like my education and getting into game design. So since we're at the 4 o'clock, or not 4 o'clock, sorry, 1 o'clock mark. So do you guys have any closing advice for the stream? And also, if you wanted to shout out anything, all good.
Getting that first job in games is super hard. I'm sure a lot of you are in that boat right now, looking for that. Keep trying. Don't get deterred. It can be really disheartening to get tons of rejections in a row. I've gotten dozens of them. We all have. But keep going at it. You'll eventually find the team that's right for you and appreciates you for the work that you do and is a good fit for you. That could take multiple teams. It could be your first team right out of the gate. I think we all eventually get there, hopefully.
Yeah, like I agree. So for me personally, story is there has been a few years, a lot of people telling me I couldn't do it because I don't fit whatever architect they assume a game designer should look like. And I just want to say, like, don't let people deter you telling you couldn't do it. And diversity and inclusion are extremely important to how video game as a media to go mainstream. So what makes you different can be an advantage, and embrace your difference and keep working towards your goal.
Yeah. Just get out there and make stuff. It's really the best way to like get into learning more about design, learning more about yourself, learning more about what you are as a creative. I'll give you all one quick thing. This is a question I ask in every game design interview I have with other people, and it's, how would you describe your voice as a designer? And I want you to think about that question and kind of like, sit on it for a minute. Like, what do you want to bring to, and similar sort of thing of like, diversity of thought, diversity of voice, what is it about you that you want to bring to games? What about your perspective? So think about that question, but that's, I think that informs a lot about you as a designer.
I just want to tag on, keep believing in yourself even if you get tons and tons of rejections, because in the end, all you can really do is keep improving yourself. Don't downplay yourself in your resumes, because I see a lot of people do that actually. It's like, oh, I've only done this. I'm only a student game, but I can do so much more. No, you can do so much more. And you should really shout that out. You can do so much more.
And don't be afraid to know what you're worth. even in the face of all these rejections. I think that's something that's really important not to lose sight of. Know what you feel you deserve, and take stock in the things that are important. I'll always champion work-life balance. I think it's really easy in this industry to get lost in passion or feel like you're not doing enough, and take time for yourself because that's important too.
Oh, and also I brought this up at the in the Twitch chat, but I'm posting a link of all of the books that I brought up earlier. There's reading list was going to be in the Discord.
Okay, awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming and joining us for the Summit Game Design panel. I believe the next block will be a little bit later. I think there's a technical issue with the stream, but Jason, do you have anything to add? Okay, sounds good.